we will now come on to the next debate, and if the attendant could inform me what's going on with the microphones. Thank you. Jonathan Edwards to move the motion. Thank you.
Mr. Pritchard, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to lead this debate and to move that this House has considered the future of hill farming in the UK post-Brexit. At the beginning, may I thank both the farming unions in Wales, NFU Cymru and the Farmers Union of Wales for their help with preparing for this debate and their overall contribution in supporting the farming industry in Wales and the wider rural economy. Wales doesn't have a national animal in the way that New Zealand has the kiwi, Australia has the kangaroo, Argentina the puma, or South Africa the springbok. We have the splendid mythical Welsh dragon, of course, but if we were to have a living animal, a very strong case could be made for the sheep, or perhaps the ram. There are over 10 million sheep in Wales based on the latest annual survey, accounting for 33% of all UK sheep. This compares to a human population of around 3 million, accounting for only 5% of the UK population. The reason for these huge numbers of sheep livestock in Wales is the terrain and the climate of my country. Wales is very mountainous, and as we know, the weather is even wetter. 82% of Welsh land is utilised for agricultural purposes, a quite incredible figure when considering Welsh terrain. Relative to the rest of the UK, 10% of UK agricultural land is located within Wales. Agriculture contributes 400% more directly to Welsh employment than the UK average, if my reading of the British government's economic Brexit impact assessments was correct. With those statistics in mind, Welsh politicians should be extremely concerned at the likely impact of Brexit on this vitally important indigenous Welsh industry. We have far more to lose following a botched Brexit than other parts of the British state. The vast majority of farming land in Wales is designated less favourable area land. It is more suited to pasture than to arable farming. As a consequence, the Welsh farming model tends to be based around the traditional family farm, based on livestock, rather than the crop-based farming we tend to see in England. Before being elected in the late winter of 2010, I visited Mr. Ian Rickman and his family farm at their Gurnos farm to undertake some work experience. Gurnos is situated high above the village of Bethlehem in the Tywi Valley near the Garn Goch. The Garn is one of the largest Iron Age forts on the Brecon Beacons mountain range and houses, of course, the monument to the late great Gwynfor Evans, a national great and the first Plaid Cymru MP elected to Westminster, who used to walk its slopes to gain solace and inspiration. It was bitterly cold, and the reality is it's only sheep that can be utilised for productive use at that sort of altitude. After that experience, I gained a huge amount of respect for the sheep as an animal, but also for those families that endeavour to make a living out of hill farming. I can assure you, Mr. Pritchard, there are far easier ways to make money and sustain a family. Let us remember that according to Welsh Government statistics, the average farm income is less than £30,000 per year in Wales. These people are, however, from the land themselves. Their families have worked the hills for generations upon generations. In doing so, they have sustained a community, a culture, a language, and a way of living that has lasted thousands of years. They have cultivated a natural landscape so beautiful that the north of my country was designated by Lonely Planet as one of the most essential places to visit in the world in 2017. As beautiful as the north is, Mr. Pritchard, I would of course say that Carmarthenshire is best. But the critical point that I am endeavouring to make is that the beauty of our country and everything that goes with it isn't something that just happens naturally. It's the result of the work of the agricultural community and their livestock. Without this, Wales wouldn't be the special place it is, and its impact would not only be felt economically, but also equally important socially. Mr. Pritchard, had I had more time, I would have elaborated on the economic and cultural importance of agriculture, the benefits it brings to tourism, other sectors of the Welsh economy, and the Welsh language. My good friend, Councillor Kevin Campbell, for instance, who leads on the executive board of Carmarthenshire County Council on rural development, has identified working with the agricultural community and young farmers' clubs as a key cog in his strategy for regenerating the economy and preserving the language in Wales. But I realise there are other members who want to speak during the debate, and I'm very grateful for the support I have received in advance of the debate from members saying they want to speak this afternoon. So I'll move on. Mr. Pritchard, farmers are a very tough bunch, used to operating in a climate of fluctuating incomes and rapid market changes for their produce. European agricultural support has been the one constant in keeping their businesses sustainable. The European market is by far the biggest external market for Welsh agricultural produce, and especially lamb. I have to tell the Minister there is a huge amount of anxiety and foreboding about the future. I've held many meetings with farmers and unions since the Brexit vote, and that level of anxiety is increasing as we move on. If this debate achieves only one thing today, I hope we can collectively begin to reduce those anxieties in the agricultural community. It seems to me that we have to concentrate on three main areas vital for the future of hill farming. Firstly, devolution, secondly, agricultural support, and then thirdly, trade. Firstly, if it is the ultimate decision of the British government to leave key European frameworks such as the single market and then clearly new frameworks for the territories of the British state will have to be created in their place to govern internal trade. I am not opposed to the creation of such frameworks if the British government does decide to shoot the economy in the foot by leaving the single market. Following Welsh independence, I would want the Welsh economy to be situated within a larger trading bloc. Cross-border economic cooperation is a very good thing. The key divide between Plaid Cymru and our unionist opponents is that we believe that any common framework should be built and regulated in cooperation between the four governments of the state as a partnership of equals. We think that any decisions on them should be made on a shared governance basis and by a properly constituted UK Council of Ministers with a robust decision-making and disputes resolution process. They, on the other hand, believe these matters should be decided in Westminster and Westminster alone. This risks Wales becoming a permanent rule taker, or as the Foreign Secretary would say, a vassal country within the British state. This risks England-specific frameworks being imposed on Wales to the detriment of hill farmers in my country. Admittedly, our position in Wales hasn't been strengthened by the contemptible capitulation of the Labour government of our country in accepting these changes. As Professor Tim Lang recently said in an evidence session to the External Affairs Committee in the National Assembly, when it comes to Brexit, Welsh interests are now steamrollerable. As I said during a ministerial statement last week, the actions of the Welsh Government will go down as one of the biggest sellouts in Welsh political history. And Mr. Pritchard, I can assure you that's quite some achievement. Of the 26 policy powers re-reserved by Westminster, we are talking about vital agricultural-related policy areas such as agricultural support, fertiliser regulation, GMO cultivation, organic farming, zootech, animal health, animal welfare, food and feed safety, food labelling, public procurement, nutrition labelling, plant health and food geographical indicators. Welsh lamb, of course, holds an EU-protected geographical indication status, as does Welsh beef.
My honourable friend give way. I thank my honourable friend, diolch yn fawr iawn. And would he agree with me that the red meat levy on animals that were reared in Wales but slaughtered in England, that it is time for that levy to come back to Wales so that Hubby Keep Cymru can do an effective job on marketing that meat?
Division, the sitting is suspended for 10 minutes and we'll resume.
Sorry, can I just...
Order. Jonathan Edwards, resume the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pritchard. My honourable colleague raises a very important point. And it's been a bone of contention for far too long for the Welsh farming community that when our products go over the border to England to be slaughtered, that the levy then is collected in England and that levy doesn't return to us for the promotion of our products. Yeah. I was saying, Mr. Pritchard, that Welsh meat, of course, has a EU-protected geographical indication. This is a mark of its quality and a vital marketing tool. Indeed, Hubby Keep Cymru considers the PGI to be of enormous economic importance to the Welsh red meat industry as it identifies the origin and the unique qualities of our lamb and beef. Hubby Keep Cymru estimate that 25% of the growth in Welsh lamb exports between 2003 and 2012 can be directly attributed to its PGI status. The Labour government has effectively handed control of this issue over to Westminster, despite the warnings of farming representatives. handed it over to a Westminster government, of course, which insists that only the Union Jack can be flown on our driving licences, despite some honourable exceptions in Wales who insist on producing the Welsh Dragon on our driving licences. Concerns over this issue aren't only reserved to Wales, of course. Food Standards Scotland Chair Ross Finney has also expressed his concern in a letter to the Scottish Parliament. He said, referring to the power grab, "However, if those matters are reserved to the UK government to determine, it will be difficult for Scottish stakeholders' voices to be heard, or for the needs of businesses or consumers in Scotland to be given priority."
I thank my neighbour and honourable member for giving way. You mentioned the framework. Most of the farmers in my constituency of Brecon and Radnorshire are very pleased that there is going to be a UK market framework. And you've already mentioned the Welsh Labour government. In fact, most of the fear from farmers in my constituency is that the Welsh Labour government will actually be in charge of farming. And thank goodness it'll be Westminster that will be leading the way.
I fear the honourable gentleman continually gets mixed up when it comes to this debate. If he'd have listened to what I said earlier, nobody's opposing the creation of common frameworks if we decide to leave the EU internal market. The key question is, where does power reside over those frameworks? Now, our approach is that the four governments of the UK, it's a multipolar state, should have a joint say over those frameworks. The approach of the honourable gentleman, he confirms it again here today, Mr Pritchard, is that these matters should only be determined in Westminster, and that is a serious political divide which separates us, and the people of Wales can cast their view on that when we come to the next election. The second major issue, as I see it, is agricultural support. Since the formation of the Common Agricultural Policy, hill farmers have received direct support which constitutes a significant element of farm incomes. 80% of total income from farming in Wales is contributed by CAP, and with about 5% of the UK population, Wales gets 9.8% of the entire EU Common Agricultural Policy spend in the UK, which equates to nearly £300 million a year. CAP, of course, is a key part of the EU's 7-year multi-annual financial framework, which gives great certainty in terms of support at a time when market prices for produce is extremely volatile.
I thank the gentleman for giving way. He talks about the Common Agricultural Policy. Does he welcome the government's announcement that they will guarantee CAP payments until 2022? And since he mentioned Scotland, will he support the NFUS, which actually supports this government's approach, which is to have common frameworks, but allow the devolution of currently devolved agricultural matters to be executed in Scotland and elsewhere in the United Kingdom?
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid, Mr Pritchard, that the situation in Wales isn't quite as good as it is here for English farmers, where there's certainty till 22. In Wales, is 20. In Wales, well, I'm not aware of what the situation is in Scotland, obviously, because I'm a Welsh member of Parliament. I'm sure the honourable gentleman would accept that. But I'm sure my colleague from Perth and North Perthshire may address those issues.
That if members want to make a contribution, they can intervene or speak. And just to say, those that intervene, be mindful this is a very popular debate. I will be imposing a time limit when Mr Edward ends and finishes. That is likely to be a shorter time period if people keep intervening. I don't want to stop debate, but just be mindful of other colleagues in the chamber. Mr Edwards.
I'm very grateful for your guidance, Mr Pritchard, and I'll return to the issue at hand in terms of Welsh farming. In Wales, the situation has been compounded by the decision of the Labour government of my country to reduce direct payments to producers by 15% by moving money from Pillar 1. However, the point remains that CAP payments offer a degree of stability. Whilst farmers previously under CAP didn't have to overtly worry about the impact of Westminster elections on the amount of agricultural support they would receive, they could easily now face a situation when a new Westminster government may radically alter agricultural support policy. And as we see from the power grab, the Labour government of my country has abdicated all responsibility. Whilst the British government has promised to protect the current UK... I'll carry on, I'm mindful of what the Mr Chairman has said. Whilst the British government has promised to protect the current UK level of EU payments until 2022, the reality is that once we have left the EU, agricultural support will become an annual issue for the budget, or in the very best, a 3-year cycle under the future comprehensive spending review. There is no guarantee that current levels of funding for Wales will continue after March 2019. We urgently need clarity for Welsh hill farmers. In particular, what is going to be the budget for agricultural support and how exactly will it be administered? I would be grateful if the Minister in responding could outline how that agricultural support has been, now that the agricultural support has been re-reserved, how will it work for Welsh hill farmers? Is the Welsh share of agricultural support going to be based on our agricultural footprint? Or does the British government intend distributing funds for Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland based on Barnett consequentials? During the referendum, the No campaign argued that farmers would receive a dividend post-Brexit because the UK would no longer have to make contributions to the EU budget. However, the reality is that there will be less money for government investment post-Brexit because the economy will slow and revenues will subsequently be less. Agriculture could find itself way down a long list of priorities for Westminster. Will the Minister outline what intergovernmental discussions have been held between the UK and the devolved governments and where exactly we are in getting clarity on this vital issue of agricultural support? The third major issue is access to export markets. The European Union is an absolute vital market for Welsh meat. Hill farmers inform me that approximately half of all their lambs are exported to the EU on a frictionless zero tariff basis. 90% of all Welsh meat exports are destined for the EU. The EU is the largest global market for agricultural produce. And while the rest of the world are doing everything possible to get access to the market, the British government is moving in the opposite direction. Preserving these markets is absolutely vital, and it's sobering that some of the highest EU tariffs are agricultural. The lowest tariffs on lamb can be under WTO rules is 40%, and they are far higher if the product is frozen or processed in any way. Admittedly, a comprehensive trade agreement with the EU could solve this problem, but while the British government continues to maintain that no deal is an option, those of us who have concerns about the negotiating strategy of the British government cannot be accused of scaremongering. We only have to look back to the chaos caused by foot and mouth. There was a collapse in market prices, a collapse in farm incomes, and a host of other problems, all because farmers could not export to the EU. Impacts on upland farms were particularly acute. While such circumstances occurred due to a ban on exports rather than trade barriers, such impacts are worth bearing in mind when we consider the potential impacts of harder Brexit scenarios. Now is the time to commit to maintaining tariff-free access to the UK's largest trading bloc through our membership of the EU Single Market and Customs Union. This would ensure that our food producers can continue to export tariff-free, that there will be no other barriers to trade, and that already established complex supply chains are not disrupted. And the FUW agrees, Mr Pritchard. The President of the Union, Glyn Roberts, said, "Since the referendum, we have maintained that we should remain within the Single Market and Customs Union. And every day that passes brings more evidence supporting our view that at least in the short term, leaving these institutions would be a grave mistake." Our farmers are proud of the standard of their produce. They are some of the highest environmental and highest welfare standards in the world. If the British government insists on dragging us out of the EU Single Market and Customs Union and pursues free trade deals with third countries, it is vital that those standards are not compromised in any way, and that our markets are not opened up to substandard produce. It is essential that such matters are not regarded as being exclusively in the remit of the UK government and Parliament. As Hubby Key Cymru's chairman Kevin Roberts has said, any future trade deal must take full account of the needs of the Welsh red meat sector. Ultimately, Mr Pritchard, any future trade deal must be fully endorsed by the National Assembly, the Scottish Parliament and indeed the Northern Ireland Assembly. To close, Mr Pritchard, agriculture, due to its complex supply chains and its prevalence in Welsh culture, is the backbone of the rural economy. It is vital, therefore, that the UK and Welsh governments do all they can to ensure its sustainability and success into the future. As the director of NFU Cymru, John Mercer, told me, farmers were promised a bright and prosperous future after Brexit, and it is now imperative that those political promises are upheld. Welsh Hill farmers potentially face a perfect storm of hindered access to their main export markets and the opening up of the UK domestic food market to lower standard food produce. Policymakers can't afford to get this wrong, and with the clock ticking, it's time for ministers to start coming up with some answers.
Yeah.
Question is,